All right, good morning, Coachella Valley. Welcome to another GCV Educates webinar. My name is Emily Filippino. I am the president and CEO for the Greater Coachella Valley Chamber of Commerce. And this event was planned and produced today by our membership team, but I'm happy to be featured with you today because we have a very special guest, and I'm fascinated by his area of study and expertise. And you are in for a treat. So I'd like to share just some housekeeping notes and some general information on what to expect through today's webinar. I'm going to make sure you understand how to connect with Dr. OKeefe if you have questions either during the webinar or after. And then I'd like to make sure that you know how to connect with our resources in general post this event. So with that, let me just remind you all that GCV Educates is a webinar series we host every other Wednesday at 11 o'clock. These are recorded, so if you have to dart for any reason, as long as you're registered with us, we're going to send you a link and you'll be able to watch or listen in later. Feel free to share the video, share the tools and resources, and register for our next upcoming event on the GCVCC events page on our website. The series that we've been focusing on is all about workforce, because we know that all of you are definitely, as business owners, challenged to find staff, and even for you as maybe an individual professional are struggling to find your place in the right workforce and right work environment. So today's webinar is going to apply to both of you. Our guest speaker for the day is Dr. John OKeefe. He's an executive neuro performance strategist. He helps executives, entrepreneurs, corporations, and athletes by mentoring them on how to create optimal decision-making, wellness, and performance. He's an advisor who brings a practical approach to corporate optimal performance by training top-level managers and business owners like yourself. So today we're going to take his expertise and some of that knowledge base, and we're going to apply it to where the heck the workforce has gone, how to attract them, and really importantly too, how to retain them. So as we get started, a couple quick housekeeping notes. If you look towards the very bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, please feel free to just type it in there. I will see it, and we will reserve a few minutes at the very end to review those questions and answers with Dr. OKeefe. So with that, I'm going to invite Dr. OKeefe to the microphone. I'm going to share his presentation, and I encourage all of you to get your pens, notepads ready, because there's certainly going to be a lot of great content. Dr. OKeefe, the microphone is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm excited because we're going to get to talk about some things that have been on the minds of many business owners and executives out there. And specifically, we're going to talk about what happened to the workforce. We were talking earlier, and it seems as though the Great Resignation, somehow the workforce disappeared. Well, it didn't disappear. There's several reasons for it. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what to look for and how to hire really exceptional people, but also, as Emily said, how to retain them. And we'll give you some tips and ideas, and hopefully that will be doing very well for you. So as we move forward, I'd like to touch base in our next slide with regards to the Great Resignation. So let's talk about that for a moment. As I said, many people thought all of a sudden a huge population just disappeared, but it hasn't disappeared. In fact, it's been several years in the running. For example, the boomers are in the midst of retiring right now. In fact, if you can believe this quote from the Pew Research people, 11,000 people retire each day in the United States. Right now, as of the, I think the third quarter in 2020, 14.6 million people, I'm sorry, 46.9 million people are retired, 14% of the population. Now, there's several reasons for that, which we'll go into. But several things happened. Number one, we talked about the boomers with regards to that to the pandemic. Now, in my next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the pandemic really changed things a lot. Some of the boomers that left early because, well, let's just mention that life became precious. They changed the way they thought about their career, their job, their family. Some of us, let me just say this, we made it through. Others, unfortunately, did not. And so they made a decision. Some of them retired very early. They thought they can, so they want to spend more time with their family. So suddenly this brain trust just seemed to disappear. And that's what we're dealing with right now. We'll talk about some of the reasons why we can modify that and bring those talented people to the forefront. In the midst of things, part of the change was our daily routine. Everybody was used to, quite a majority of them was used to going to a facility, a business, whatever that facility was, to do their work. Suddenly, if they had a job, they were doing it at home. It became something known as environmental change. Some of us learned how to adapt. And I want to say this right now. It's not the strongest who survive, it's those who adapt. Whether you're an individual or a corporation, when you adapt to the circumstances, your chances of survival are much better. What does that mean? Well, we went from working in a facility, in an office, to working at home. Some of the population could do it, some others didn't. So more went by the wayside. And that gave room to something called the gig economy, which we'll talk about later. And we'll go further in our next slide. So let's talk about the key reasons why people are walking away. And I always tell someone, because a lot of executives ask me, well, how much money do I have to work with? Well, surprise, it's not about the money completely. Yes, there were dissatisfaction with the wages. The bottom line in that discussion is all the companies out there, we're all going to have to be paying on par. But the dissatisfaction was also with compensation. And that means for some time now, companies, for a variety of reasons, have been cutting back on their compensation packages for health insurance, for time off, all of the things that were considered the average compensation piece. And they were cutting back for a variety of financial reasons. But what that meant to the employee was they thought that they just didn't mean that much to the company. Because psychologically, there's two things. Number one, we have two families. Our home family, our family with our children, our spouses, our partners, and our friends, and what we do on a daily basis there. But there's another family. It's called the work family. You may have referenced that yourself or heard that statement, because we spend a lot of time at work. We get to know and have great relationships with our work partners, and it's a wonderful thing. But they began to lose trust in that situation. And it was really about communication, which we'll talk about later. They became frustrated with the corporate culture. Basically, when they felt they were just a number, that when they were done, they'd just find somebody else. They felt burnout in some situations. They began to think about doing something else or retirement. So in our next slide, we'll go further in that situation. The toxic corporate or company culture. Some real key bullet points. What was really negative was failure to promote. People joined a company and they expected to be promoted from within. You have to perform, you have to do what you have to do. But oftentimes they found companies tended to go outside for a position for a variety of reasons, but they felt left behind. And so that just added to their reason for leaving, making a change. Lack of diversity. Lack of diversity means a lot of things. Diversity in capabilities, diversity in job descriptions, diversity in the people there at work. if they felt excluded or alone. That added more to a sense of isolation, something we'll call later, which is psychological safety. Lack of inclusion. Here's the thing that it's really sad when you think about it. By a simple process of including your employees in decision, being very structured, clear, and concise on what they need to do, what their job descriptions are, and asking their opinion. Something as simple as that can lead to heightened loyalty. Many, for a variety of reasons, felt this lack of inclusion. So as a result, workers felt disrespected. They felt like they really didn't matter. And as you'll see a little further down the line, that's a real key situation. They have to feel that their ideas matter, that what they do matter. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, unethical behavior. Whether that means by the company or unethical behavior by their co-workers, they felt a part of that. They didn't want to be a part of that. So all of those things, that toxic corporate culture aided in making a decision to go somewhere else. And we'll talk more on the next slide about the key things that are important. One of the things that they really felt strongly about was job insecurity and reorganization. Now, during a pandemic, things have to be done. I know, and you know, that when it first happened, within a week, many companies closed their door. Thousands of companies right here closed their doors forever. Some people cut back 50%, others down to 10%, barely hung on. But the idea is they looked at the organization. If they had a history of constantly reorganizing, constantly letting go of people without specific training and those kinds of things, they felt like they too did not have a chance to go anywhere in the company. If there was a history of constant layoffs or restructuring, that was also an issue. For a while, there was a tendency in business to restructure by cutting back on expenses, but then cutting off employees, large amounts of layoffs. For whatever reason, justified or unjustified, employees on a broad scale began to feel that this was something that they were exposed to, and they became afraid. And those who retired or quit their jobs, that's one of the reasons. So we need to be very careful about our decision making. It's all about the decisions that we make. And lack of transparency, I can't stress this enough. It's a very simple thing. Let the people know what your mission statement is. Let the people know where your vision is, and let them be a part of it. Let them join in with you. That is one of the things that creates loyalty. It's very simple. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it's up to you to make that happen. And so as we go on to our next slide, we'll talk about other elements as well. One of these key things is failure to recognize performance. Part of the human being is we're born to create. We're born to thrive. And that's part of it, is creating whatever we are interested in. And our job descriptions are one of it. People join a company not only for a salary or all the benefits. They join because they believe in the product, service, or purpose. And so if there's a failure to recognize their performance, then they feel left out. And that's one of the reasons why they leave. So if you want to retain people, focus on understanding their high performance, rewarding that performance with all kinds of things. There's a variety of things that can be done, not just with money, but by recognizing their performance in a variety of ways. And also, contrary to that, people felt really left out when people who aren't performing stayed in the position for a long time. They felt like they weren't recognized. In fact, that those people were holding them back. And so it not only didn't do good for the company, it didn't do good for the employees. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that caused a high amount of attrition. And if the company had a history of that high attrition, people didn't want to be a part of it. If they tolerated underperformance for any reason, that was a key signal, because the top people want to perform, they want to create, they want to do well. So be careful to really recognize the people who are high performers and make the changes you have to make. When you find that someone's just not working out, make that change, but be careful in that process. And in our next slide, we'll talk about this even further. So let's go through the 5 keys to hiring and developing exceptional employees as a team. We're going to talk about psychological safety quite a bit. Psychological safety, in an overview, is very important. It's nothing new. They gave it a name back in the 90s through the work at Harvard. Wonderful process there. And they found that psychological safety is something every human seeks, whether it's in business or personal. They seek an environment where they can speak their mind, where they can contribute, where they know they're not going to be bullied, that they're safe to develop their capabilities and safe to say what they need or think. To that extent, where psychological safety is addressed and recognized, that's going to create key employees. So if you take time to communicate with your employees, let them know that you're interested in their beliefs, ideas, and thoughts, you're going to create that loyalty, which will help them last in their career with you. Dependability. Some of these things sound basic, and they are, but there's a lot of reasons why people are hired, but they have to be dependable. Look for dependability in everybody that you hire. I know some people who said, look, they're great salespeople. It's a little flaky, but I know that they're going to do well. In the end, they have to be dependable, because here's the thing. These processes were also developed by big companies who got together and did major studies, Google among them and everybody else. And they found that these same things that affected individual performance also made a great team. What does that mean? That means that your employees look for those same things in their coworkers. They want it in the company, but they want to be able to depend not only on the company, but depend on their coworkers, whatever the situation might be. When it comes a need to do a change or depend on someone else to get something done, if they can't depend on other people, then that makes them less performance minded. They have to be dependable. Company has to be dependable, and so does their coworkers. Structure and clarity. Structure and clarity is innate in the human being. We all want structure. We need to know really exactly what we're going to do. Yes, there are creative types who depend on their own creativity to make that way, but still, that's structure by being unstructured. They understand that. Most of the time, whenever you're looking at an employee, make sure that they're open to structure and give them clarity on what that structure means. Make sure that they're willing to have structure. If they're not, and structure is a big thing for your product or service or company, you need to address that very quickly. If you look for someone who loves that structure and clarity, and you're willing to give that structure and clarity, it's going to be part of a great match. Meaning, one of the things they found is that people crave that what they do, their work product, their focus, their emotional process needs to have meaning. They want to know that what they do creates meaning in the world. And so the best way to get through this is when you look for an employee, find out the employees that have meaning, that seek that meaning. When they do, and that's important to you, it's going to be a great match. Does that make sense? Now we're on to impact. Believe it or not, just as much as a company wants to make an impact in the marketplace, in their community, wherever it might be, so does the employee, the good employee. You'll find that people really have a desire. They want to know that what they do, their assignment, their capability, all of their work product makes an impact on the company. They want the company to grow, because if the company grows, they'll grow. They want what they do to create good things for their community. And when that happens, everybody works well together. So look for someone who wants to make impact. If they're there just because of the salary, it's not going to last long. So those are 5 of the key things that have been key to finding in an employee. Look for those 5 things in every interview you have, and also be ready to display those things as a company, because that's where the match is key in terms of performance. So we'll move on to the next slide and we'll talk more about a couple of things. There's a summary of psychological safety, and I'll just go through it real quickly. Again, it's a concept where members of a team believe they're free to speak their minds with work-related ideas and concerns. They're encouraged to question, discuss, and evaluate problems and situations. Fear of negative consequences is not present. That is so important, that your people can be a part of what you do, because in good times, it's wonderful. In tough times, when there has to be change, that's when all of this element of psychological safety really is key. Let me grab a drink of water here. And so I urge you to place a high priority on making sure that psychological safety is present in your team members, employees, and you. So the next question we have is, should you hire for attitude or resume? Of course, I'm a big education person, and it matters quite a bit. And your resume, when you find somebody with a great resume that's right down, that checks off all the boxes that you need, that's a wonderful thing. But I will tell you this, more than anything else, attitude is really key, because there's not much that cannot be trained. Training is key, and you can always train certain service aspects, product aspects, job descriptions, whatever that might be. Those can be trained and learned. And I support that. But that attitude that comes across is the ultimate in success. Let's talk about attitude, for example, in a classic situation. Remember the Wright brothers, the airplane? Well, they tried for many years to create that process that created the airplane. They were told, you're nuts, you're crazy, that's not going to happen. But their attitude moved them forward. And they finally created the situation. Now, they were told, again, they're crazy. You can imagine people saying, okay, Orville, let me get this straight. Remember that the horse was the top technology at the time. Let me get this straight, Orville. You're going to put a human being in a machine, and it's going to fly around the city and sometime around the state and eventually around the world, and we're all going to fly in this contraption? Orville, you've been hitting the whiskey? You know, they just didn't believe it, and it almost didn't get done. They almost didn't get the financial backing and things that required because of that. But they continued. They found the people that were like-minded, and they were able to create that because of a sensational attitude. And let me tell you a response. At that same time in France, there was another gentleman in a company who was doing much the same thing that Orville and Wilbur were doing. And he was quite far along. But guess what? The flight at Kitty Hawk, when it was announced and done, after all the congratulations, guess what that person did? They quit. They stopped. Their attitude was, okay, that's it. This is done. I'm out of it. Well, that was only the beginning. You can imagine what we are now. What would you do without the airplane? It's all a part of our lives now. And so that's an example of how important attitude is. So I urge you to really pay a lot of attention to the person's attitude. A service attitude, if it's customer facing, they've got to be customer oriented. If it's internal processes, they've got to be ready, willing, and able to be agile and shift and change wherever that might be. All right, so we'll move on with that. And I hope that you really focus on attitude in those situations. 3 key performance characteristics to look for. And I think this is really important. That's why we chose these 3 today. Dependability. Outside of everything, you have to have an employee who's dependable. And as an employer, you have to be dependable. They have to be able to depend on you for their livelihood, to know that your vision, your purpose is carried out. They need to know that your vision plan, your marketing plan, your business plan, all of those things are succinct and accepted, because the more they do, the more dependable they will be for you. Does that make sense? I hope so. So I included an interview question that moves along this line. Describe a time when you couldn't complete an important project or task before a deadline. What did you do? When you ask questions like that are task-oriented, that are experiential-oriented, what would they do? What was their decision? By their answer, you'll find out whether they were dependable, whether they moved forward, whether they had that attitude that they could get it done, and you'll find out what they did in that situation. Resilience, an interview question there. We need resilient people in the position, because today, the only thing that is certain is change. And if you're not resilient to bounce back after change, success is going to be very tough. So resilience is something you need to look for. You also need to be able to plan resilience in your company. Things are going to happen. You'll need to be able to shift and change and be agile. You know, my dad said one time to me, he said, you know, the mark of a champion is not just to be never knocked down, but the champion who gets knocked down and get back up and fights again until they win. That's the mark of a champion. Now, whatever analogy you use, I think you get it. It's resilience that needs to happen. And when you ask a question like what you see there now, that's going to help you. Remember, along the lines of the questions, remember to ask open-ended questions, starting with why, how, when, tell me about it. Let them be open, and they'll tell you everything you need to know, and you'll find the right employee. The third one is really important, and we'll go into it a little bit. Embrace change. Certainly, we've seen what's happened in the last 2 years with the pandemic. Change that came about, we didn't want that kind of change, but unfortunately, that pandemic happened. So each of us in our own way was forced to make the changes in our life that we had to do. Some of us did, and some of us didn't. Again, when you embrace change, because here's the thing, change is the only thing in life that's consistent. Change happens, and you have to embrace it. So an interview question here. Project's direction changes suddenly. What do you do? Very simple question. But by their answer, you'll find out whether they really are embracing change, whether they can change, or it's just something that they want to say. And those 3 things are 3 of the most important characteristics that an employee has to have. Those are the core characteristics that everything else can be built on. And so I hope that you focus on those things when you're interviewing, but also remember, you have to have those things in your company. So ask yourself, is your company dependable? Whatever your product or service is. Is your company resilient? Will you find a way to do something? Are you able to embrace change? You know, there are companies that say, look, we've done it this way. It's been done like this for 20 years, and that's the way it is. Well, if things change, you're left behind. Don't be left behind. Embrace change, because you're more powerful than you understand. And when you take your passion and purpose and lock it in and focus on that, change doesn't mean what it used to be. And I'll tell you another secret right here today. The human brain doesn't like change. It's designed to keep you in a position of stasis. In other words, where you are now. All it knows is where you are, you're comfortable with, it's okay. It doesn't make a judgment that things could be better. You could have millions of dollars or success as you define it. It just knows, I'm going to keep you right here because that's where you should be. And so that's why you have to work so hard and smart to make those changes, because when you move through and make those changes, that's where success happens. So in looking for employees, when you show that capability, that's going to attract. You're going to attract the right kind of people. You're also going to be much, much stronger and better as a company. And so I ask you to look for the ability to change and be ready to change yourself. And so we'll move on our next slide and we'll talk about more things like that. So the essential first step when hiring an employee, and I can't emphasize this enough. Yes, it's very basic, but it is being skipped, especially today. You know, we've had these last couple of years where we closed down. We basically almost didn't make it, but companies came back. So they're getting back. The people are ready to get back and buy goods and services. You know, you look at it today in the hospitality section. They want to be entertained. They want to go to dinner. They're thriving to get out there. And so the tendency is, let's just hire somebody, you know, sometimes fog up a mirror. Okay, you're done. You're out there. Well, what's going to happen is that's going to not do well for their impression of your service or company. And so there's a tendency, let's just get the person out there, whatever their job is, and they'll do fine. We'll help them along the way. Absolutely. Don't skimp on training. The first thing you need to do is train that employee on their job specifics, on their KPIs, key performance indicators, whatever it is, the tasks and responsibilities, and train them in your methodology. You'll have a certain way that you do things. Maybe your company's known for a certain kind of thing. Make sure they know the steps that you need to do. And that training will be reflected, because too many people now are saying, even though it's been a difficult thing, they're saying, you know, I'm sorry, we just have a hard time finding people. I'm sorry, we just can't get parts and supplies and everything else. Supply chain issues. I sympathize, but that's not the client's issue. They want their service, their product. And so that's where we have to go. So make sure that you train specifically in product knowledge. If you've ever been someplace, I can tell you in the last couple of months, I went into places, I'm not going to name names, of course, but I asked for certain things, and the employee obviously was fairly new, looked at me with a blank face and said, I don't know, I think it's over there. Well, that didn't build confidence in me. That didn't get me what I needed to do. And so that created a new impression of what that company was like. And let me tell you, that's another thing where within 30 seconds, you walk into a company, whatever that might be, for a product or service. And depending on everything, how you're greeted, what you experience, the customer experience, you make a quick decision on whether you want to be there, whether you want to spend your money, or whether you want to come back. That is why training is so very vital and important. And so we'll move on to the next slide and go from there. I want to spend some time now on giving you some techniques that you can use in your hiring process, in the interviews, to create and find the right kind of employees. Communication is everything. Today, the people who communicate are the people who are going to be successful, who are concise, who are focused, who people feel comfortable with in any given situation. And once again, we talk about the first 30 seconds, especially in a hiring situation. You'll get a feeling for someone based on your entire life, your experience professionally, of what you accept to be a good employee, a good person. You'll make decisions very quickly on who they are, what they do, whether they're safe to be around, whether they're good to be around, whether they're sharp, whether they're good, bad, indifferent. And some of them, it's unconscious. This is just what happens to your brain in that process. It's connected to flight or fight. I want to take a few minutes and talk about flight or fight at its basic. What that means basically is millions of years ago when there were dinosaurs and human being was prey, we'd have to make a decision. This big thing's coming at us. Do we run or do we fight? Today, there's no such thing as dinosaurs. They're all gone. But that pressure, that negativity is what creates that flight or fight situation. And so all of your experiences in terms of employees, what makes a good employee, what doesn't make a good employee, is that flight or fight situation. So when you accept an employee into your corporation, it's based on what you feel they are going to do for you, that they're professional in what they do. When you don't, that's the flight process. We want to get away from that. We don't want that person. That flight or fight is present in our everyday processes. So be aware of that. So when you get a feeling, and people call it different things. I have a gut feeling about someone. I got a good vibe from that employee. When you feel good with that employee, focus on that as part of how your decision-making process goes. Part of doing that is learning channels. So if there's anything today that you really focus on, take this with you. We all, as human beings, have 3 learning channels: visual, sight, auditory, hearing, and kinesthetic, which is anything, think about it this way, that's not the first 2. That's taste, smell, sense. That makes sense? Okay. So here's a key. If you're not sure of what your employee or interviewee's learning channel is, 80% of the population happens to be visual as their primary channel. I'll say that again. 80% of the population happens to be visual. So if you're not sure, start with a visual process. What does that mean? You'll be in conversation. You'll be asking the question. And so they'll respond to you and they'll say something like, I see what you mean. I saw the job description and it looks like this might be a good job for me. So which channel is that? Yes, it's the visual channel. All right, so you have an idea of how they interpret things, how they communicate. So secondarily, you're talking to your interviewee and they say something to you like, I hear you. It sounds like a great job to me. Which channel is that? Auditory, you're right. And then kinesthetic. Same, whatever question you might put it, and they might answer you like, well, this feels like the right place to be. It feels like I'm going to have a great career. I sense that we're on the same track. I feel like your mission statement is something that I agree with. Well, that's kinesthetic. And so why is this important? The next step will tell you. When you answer back to them after you've heard their learning channels, answer in their same learning channel, visual to visual, auditory to auditory, kinesthetic to kinesthetic. When you do, that's where that gut feeling connects. That's where you get that feeling of connectivity. That's where you heighten the feeling of, I really understand this person. They'll understand you, you'll understand them. And believe me, today more than ever, employees want to belong to a great company. They want to be part of a destiny. They want to be part of a purpose, but it's up to you to articulate that. And I know you can. You're more powerful than you understand. And so that's what the mirroring their learning channels is mirror it back to them. When they say something, watch how they say, what they say, and then mirror that answer back. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And so also, we all have a little bit of each one of the channels. So there's a primary channel. We've talked about that, visual. But as you listen and as you work with something, you'll see that, okay, they're auditory too, because they'll give you cues like, well, that sounds good. And I saw that in the description. Or they'll say, oh, I feel strongly about my position here. It sounds really good. because what I see is a great future. That's all of them. So when you have that, answer them back in that learning channel, all of them, if that process is. Why? The more you do that, the stronger you connect. And you'll connect without being obvious. You'll connect without being, overly intrusive. You'll feel that connection, both you and them. So here's the thing that I can't stress enough. Maybe I've said it a couple times. When you're in your interview with them, stress what your mission is, what your vision is, what your purpose is. And on a sidebar, if you're not sure what your purpose is, if you're not sure what your mission is, then it's time to rethink and refocus. Most businesses have a clear, concise idea, articulate it. Because the employee that you want them to share in your vision. You want them to buy into what you're doing. And on retention, every step we've talked about today, that's exactly how retention works. When you show these characteristics to your employees, when they feel supported, that's that psychological safety. And they know that their company's there for them in every way possible. They feel good about what they do. They feel good that they're part of a mission. They're part of a purpose. They're part of the community and what they're doing. That creates strong loyalty that you just can't buy. Let me tell you a quick story about a company back in the East Coast. I'm not going to use names, it's not important. But it was a grocery line. They had about 90 stores or so, and their people had been there an average of 10, 20, some 30 years. They did very well. They were huge in the community, and everybody loved this particular store. A great following. Well, as things happen, the store chain was bought. And the venture capital company that bought the company made a decision, for whatever reason, to remove the CEO. So they did. This sent shockwaves into all of the stores, because the key thing was the CEO did something called management by walking around, which means he would show up at the stores, he would talk to the people, he made sure that all of their policies and procedures included the employees, and they had a great working environment. They became very close to him. They felt like he was part of the family. You know what they did? They boycotted their jobs. They went on boycott and walked out. Amazing, when you would think, hey, people are just there, they'll carry on their jobs. And they held to it together until they brought, guess what, the CEO back. That's part of the community. And that kind of loyalty is key. I know that you want to be that kind of employer. You want to have great employees. And just as they want to have a loyal boss, you want to be loyal to them. It's got to match. And the more you do everything we've talked about today, the more that will be a process. And so I wish you the much success and happiness. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about those things. So coming up next, we're going to get into a deeper process, how to train your brain for success. Everything we've talked about today, we're going to talk about the part of the brain that creates that, the why, the where, and give you the equipment to do that. But the main thing I want you to know, I've said it a couple of times, is you're more powerful than you know. When you express your passion, your purpose, your focus to your employees, to your customers, whatever that might be, that's when you become an incredible entity. The most successful people do that process. Let me tell you about someone, Richard Branson. I think we all know Virgin Companies. Someone asked him, they said, Richard, you own part of, I think it was 600 companies. They said, how do you do that? How do you manage in that situation? How do you even carry on? And he said, here's what I do. I hire people smarter than I am. I support them. I give them what they need, and then I get out of their way. And that's been his philosophy all along. And talking about promoting within, quite a few of the Virgin folks have been there a long time, and they're promoted from within, but they have to perform. All of the things we talked about are instrumental in those situations. There's lots of stories about that, but that's the story of people who are continuously successful at the highest level. You can be too. And it's been such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks very much for spending time.
Thank you so much, Dr. OKeefe. There was definitely a lot of content in there, and your education kind of shone through. So I definitely took a lot of notes, and I'm going to look for some questions. I actually have like one or two to even proctor with you myself.
Okay.
You gave us 5 different qualities to look for as we are as hiring or maybe interviewing talent, and you said them rather formally. I've got psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. And I would say, gosh, for the average business owner, you know, when we say the word psychological safety, could we boil that down to just being a work environment in which your employee could feel like they are trusted and like they can trust management? That's another way of defining what psychological safety might be.
Bingo. You hit it right on the head. You know, that's perfect. And I would say to the people listening out there, psychological safety, it's kind of a, you know, what we call the $25 word. It's a big, it's a big word. Don't let that throw you. That's exactly what that is. It's a place where they can feel a part of the company, that they feel safe in saying what they're going to say. They may have an idea. They want to be able to put that idea to the employer. They feel safe in doing that. That's going to create that kind of loyalty. So you're exactly right.
Okay, so if I can break that down a little bit further, you shared these 5 points as being really important for either hiring managers, and employers to be aware of. They're kind of like 5 different attraction points for an employee, if I'm hearing you correctly. And for those of us who are struggling to staff and retain staff, it's important for us to tune into these things, because if we're constantly turning over staff, perhaps we can tweak 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 of these things to improve our retention. Do you have any examples or practical tips on how a business might assess how they're doing in each of those 5 areas?
That's a great question. Well, there's a variety of things we can do, but to give a quick idea, try giving a roundtable. Call in your employees and use it as a score sheet. Ask them specifically, how are we doing in a specific area? What could we change? What could we do better? They'll tell you when they're not afraid to speak up. They'll give you great ideas. Oftentimes, purposes have been developed because of the ideas of the employees. But when you ask them what they want to do, and be very concise in your questions, be very clear. Don't be afraid to ask a pointed question, but be ready to get the answer. And that's very important. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's part of that psychological safety, right? If you're given feedback, and maybe it's critical from staff, it's just being a good receiver of that and acknowledging it and making them feel like they're welcome to share feedback, good or bad. Got
Absolutely. It. You know, can I give do we have time to give a quick example?
Sure.
I had a executive who they loved talking to the people, and they wanted to have an open door policy, but they had a lot of employees to the point where they were always coming in and saying, hey, this is an idea, this is an idea. And he finally goes, I got to stay home to get my work done, you know? But he wanted these ideas. So I sat down with him and I implemented a strategy, and people can take that with them. If they have something that the employee says, here's my idea, or here's how I feel, or here's my issue, then ask them to do this. To whatever the issue is, whatever the question is, ask them to come up with 3 decision points, 3 ways that they would solve the issue, 3 ways that they would add to the process, 3 new ideas. And then if they haven't solved their own question, then they went to the executive. So it saved a lot of time, and their communication was very clear and concise. When they got together, they were spot on, and they both, connected to each other. And it's all about connectivity, connecting and building that relationship.
Another way to, I've seen different businesses facilitate that by either like literally just having a box where employees can drop in a comment card with ideas.
Right.
Other great suggestions that I could take away from businesses I've observed would be to reward or incentivize that. Maybe you have, you facilitate a way for your employees to give feedback. And if it's not anonymous, and maybe if management decides to use one of those ideas, like give us, your top 3 ways of improving our productivity or improving customer satisfaction. Employees can leave ideas, and maybe if management chooses one of those ideas to implement, they win a pair of movie tickets, or there's some type of monetary bonus, or they get to leave an hour early, or something like that. But you could probably incentivize that kind of constructive feedback. But I think it's really important for managers then to use and acknowledge the feedback.
Oh, absolutely. There's one company that some people who came back with a great idea that became a company standard. They actually put their name, they put a sentence out, put a plaque up and said, XYZ person came up with this idea. And the employee was just, flabbergasted. They couldn't believe that they were recognized like that. And of course, all the employees saw that, and it was a great purpose. And it didn't cost a lot of money. It just took some time to recognize. So
Yeah.
you're exactly right in your ideas on that.
So it seems to me that in this really tough market for staffing, you've helped us identify something. We know why the workforce is kind of missing in action. Many of them moved on with COVID after layoffs to either pursue like higher education, industry shifts, or as you pointed out, even the gig economy, which gives individuals a lot of flexibility and freedom to manage their own time and their own income. So as an employer who wants to, maybe entice some of those people back, we should be on almost like a PR campaign about the work environments that we foster. And perhaps we could even integrate that into like our interview questions and sharing a bit about our work environment and what we hope to offer the employees as a way to entice them.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, that is exactly a great explanation, because they don't know. They're coming there to find out about the company, depending on if it's the second or third or first interview, whatever that is. The more the employer shares those things, the more that the person wants to be a part of that, especially when you identify using the learning channels we talked about. You'll be able to connect in those ways because you want those employees who really resonate with the company purpose, passion, and vision and mission.
Yeah. Well, lots of great information. You touched on some similar subject matter, and because you're an expert in just kind of the neuroscience behind employee engagement, staffing, retention, and decision making, you shared that you have some upcoming webinars or educational series is happening. Who would typically attend that? Is that something for higher level managers? Is it for your frontline employee? Who should be engaging in that space?
Well, definitely the executives, business owners, and entrepreneurs should, because those actions, habits, and behaviors are going to be key to the successful decisions they make. But also the employees, it's important that they take heed, because in their jobs, they'll know more about what they have to do, and more specifically, how to do it. And even more key, how to communicate with their bosses, with different departments. Because if I can take a few minutes and say, oftentimes I'll go into a company and they'll say, well, marketing doesn't understand sales, and sales doesn't understand marketing. And we have to get everybody together. Sales thinks marketing crazy, crazy thinks, marketing thinks that sales crazy, or they don't understand production. And the more we can come together the better that'll be. So it's all really about understanding how the human mind creates that. And the neuroscience basically is how the mind and body work together.
Yeah.
And I can say this, and I'd also like people to remember this. The mind tends to work to achieve your most dominant thought. So if you stay focused on your passion, your purpose, your outcome, stay focused on the kind of employee you want, the outcome that you want from them, that's where it's going to tend to go. And you'll connect with someone, because just as the owner wants to have a successful company, the employee wants to have success for themselves.
Yeah. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and really just gave us like a behind the scenes psychology on how all of this is working with why workforce is lacking, why some might be disengaged and so willing to move on to just the next best thing, and ultimately why it's so hard for hiring managers and business owners right now to staff. So perhaps we can use a little bit of this reverse psychology to make a change in our workplace.
There you go. It's all about connecting.
Well, on behalf of the Chamber, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. For those of you who are either watching a recorded version or with us live today, we will be sending out a follow-up so that you can access both the PowerPoint materials as well as a copy of the recording if you just need to hear it all over again. And Dr. O'Keefe, perhaps we can invite you back soon to take us further into some of that psychology between the team dynamics and the manager and employee dynamics, and you can probably give us some great practical tips to be better stewards of our work environment.
That would be a pleasure. And Emily, it's been so wonderful. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. And I'd like to leave you and everyone with this thought. Remember, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you're right.
Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Have a fabulous afternoon, Coachella Valley, and we'll be seeing you in 2 weeks with another GCV Educates.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.